France against the All Blacks this weekend, folks, from Paris. Red hot All Blacks coming into this one. Wins over England and Ireland. Can they get the job done over France? France has had New Zealand's number the last couple of times we have met, including at the last World Cup. We'll go through the squads, which have been announced, some recent history between the sides, some stats, predictions, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how this one is going to go. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Loads more rugby content coming your way. But yes, France, they've made a few changes from the side which beat Japan last week. It was, I guess, with all due respect to Japan, a pretty decent warm-up for the French ahead of this game against the All Blacks, whereas the Irish came into the All Blacks game maybe a little bit cold. France should be really well warmed up, although they have made a number of changes, including a 6-2 split on the bench for this one. They've gone with Gros, Malvaka and Tatafu as the same front row, which did pretty well against the Japanese scrum last week, although it's kind of hard to gauge. The All Blacks played the same Japanese side a few weeks earlier, and it was kind of parity at scrum time, albeit under a pitch which was tearing up a lot underfoot. Flamand and Meafu is the same second row as last week. It's a big man, little man, if you want to call it that, because Meafu is an absolute unit. He's 140 odd kilos, and then Flamand is a proper skills man alongside him. So a lot of extra pressure coming from that second row on at scrum time. Potentially helping the French props get some pay against the ABs. We'll have to wait and see. It's not often that the All Blacks give advantage away in terms of not weighing more than the opposition, but I feel like this is going to be one week where the All Blacks pack is slightly lower on weight, even if we do have a couple of big units of our own. Back row is Boudéon, Roumat, and Aldrit. That's a slightly changed back row from the one last week. Remember Francois Cros, the absolute tackling machine. He is out injured, and Boudéon replaces him. Boudéon came off the bench and scored a couple of tries against the Japanese. He's a proper big lump of a man as well. And Aldrit maybe uncharacteristically quiet from the number 8 jersey. We're used to seeing him just top the tackle count, get through a bunch of run meters and whatnot, but he'll be looking to kind of replicate some of that form this week, which he couldn't quite grasp last week. All of the talk here in New Zealand has been about Antoine Dupont. How do you stop Antoine Dupont? Because Razor keeps getting asked, what do you do about Dupont? Well, Dupont's a good player, man. He was exceptional against Japan last week. When he and Ramos went off at the 9-10 combo, things seemed to slow down a bit for the French. Dupont got like the most defenders beaten in the game. He had a bunch of run meters in that game. He had a try denied. He set up a couple. Antoine Dupont is going to do Antoine Dupont things. I think it's all about kind of the team game and trying to minimize the risk in other areas than really focusing on just one man. But certainly for France, good to have him back with the 15s and back in good form. Ramos is at 10, like I mentioned. He also pulled the strings really well last week. Kicked the majority of his goals until he was substituted. Moefana and Fiku, that's a slightly changed midfield with the veteran Fiku coming in for Gaetan, who drops to the bench. And then Biel Biarré on the left wing was really letting loose with the footwork of his and getting heaps of space with the little kicks that he was putting through. So it's certainly one thing that the All Blacks coaching staff will be doing their homework on, because if you leave him the space, he's got the footwork to get around people and the pace to catch up to the ball before anybody else. Villiers comes in on the right wing. Remember, Penaud was initially named to face Japan but got injured or pulled out injured before that game. He's still not available. And then last week's Atisogbe is replaced by Villiers, who is a little bit of a veteran or seemed to have kind of dropped his place in the pecking order in recent times. And then there's an interesting one with a debut for Romain Bourreau at the back. It's an interesting one to drop a guy in for his first ever match against the All Blacks, but very attacking-minded fullback. And if you're good enough, then it doesn't really matter who your opposition is. I'm sure he will be fired up to get his first ever French cap. Bench-wise, Marchand, Wardy, and Henri Colombe. That is the front row replacements, so same as last week. Romain Tafafanua is another big bit of beef to come off the bench. A proper big unit, tight head lock. Probably going to replace Meafu, so there won't be much let up at scrum time having that second row pressure coming through. Gia is another lock to replace potentially Flamand or potentially see a bit of a back row shift. We'll have to wait and see, but he's the extra man in terms of the extra forward on the bench. Olivant is there. He can cover the entire back row. He's back into the 23. Legarec comes in the place of Maxime Lucu, so he's the youngster, really attacking-minded 9, can also kick the goals. And Emilien Gaiton, the midfielder, is there as the other back replacement. No real replacement for 10 in this French side. If Ramos goes down early, I can only assume Dupont is going to 10, because I don't see anybody else in the squad that plays 10. There's plenty of guys who can play wing, midfield, fullback, but I don't know that there's any other kind of 10 on the bench. Someone enlighten me if I am mistaken. For the All Blacks, they have made, I feel like, some relatively predictable, kind of conservative changes. Like Razor has brought in, because we've also lost our own tackling machine in Sam Cane. He's out with injury. So they've brought in Savia at 7, which I feel like is the more conservative option than just chucking Peter Lakai in for like his second ever All Blacks cap against France. So it was some people who were speculating Lakai maybe drop straight in, and then Savia continues to spot at 8 with Satiti at 6. But no, it is Artie back to 7, where he's not played in the All Blacks rugby for a few years, but he's, as Razor said in his press conference, he's played a lot of rugby over Japan at 7. He started his career at a 7, so he should be pretty familiar with that spot. Satiti is in his more familiar spot at 8, and then Finau comes in at 6. For the love of goodness, let that guy throw his body around this week, because he's a big unit of a man, but sometimes just seems a little bit soft in the contact. So I hope he can front up against what is going to be a big physical French pack. And he's certainly a bit of extra height in the number 6 jersey as well. Potentially another liner option. Tamaiti Williams is another big unit. He's our guy in at loose head. He still retains the spot ahead of Ethan de Groot. So he's going to help us in terms of our overall pack weight. That is for sure. He's been in good form as well. Cody Taylor returns after missing last week with HIA protocols, so they'll welcome him back, which means Almua, who was cracking last week, drops to the bench. And then Lomax, who's been our premier tight head scrummager for a wee while now, continues on at tight head. So scrum time, they'll certainly give the French guys a good contest. The second row is still Vati and Barrett, who are proving to be quite a duo. Scotty gets through a lot of the kind of grunt work. Tends to be one of our top tacklers and gets through quite a few carries. And then Vati has been our real skills guy at line-out time, especially disrupting opposition line-out ball. I mentioned the back row already. I hope to see more from Finau. He's the main guy I've got to focus on. I don't think Savia will miss a beat at number 7 personally. Roygaard is an exciting one to have at number 9. His battle up against Dupont is going to be a fascinating one, because we rate Roygaard really highly here in New Zealand. I think for good reason. He came off the bench and looked exceptional against Ireland at the weekend just gone, and barring his injury, which kept him out for about half the year, has just looked like quite a player. So it's still very on in his career as to kind of what level he will get to, but his battle up against Dupont, there's no better guy to kind of prove yourself against. Bodie Barrett is back into the 23, into the number 10 jersey, so he displaces D-Mac, who was likewise really good last week. So Almoa and D-Mac, both who were exceptional, dropped their spots back to the guys who are returning from injury. So that's, again, a little bit of a conservative one, but you can see why Razor's gone that way. Jordy Barrett and Rico Ioane in at 12 and 13. So same as last week, pretty steady as she goes. Sever Reese replaces Mark Talia, who's unavailable on the right wing. There's still the left wing with Caleb Clark and Will Jordan there at fullback. So it might be nice to see the All Blacks pepper the French backfield with some high balls this week, because Villier's not the biggest dude on the right wing. And Bourreau is in his first ever test, so maybe a little bit of extra pressure for him. Use some of Caleb Clark's height. We'll kind of have to wait and see. Almura, as I mentioned, Tuangafasi and Tossi. That's our front row replacement, so there's a fair bit of weight in that area of the pitch as well. Tuipulotu is going to get his 50th cap, so big congratulations to him. He'll do so from the bench, and I feel like in a lot of other teams he'd be starting, but he is adding proper impact. Lakai is in there on the bench because we're having a little bit of a loose forward crisis in terms of injuries. No Jacobson, no Papali'i, no Blackadder, now no Kane. So Lakai is kind of on the back of some All Blacks 15 camp time, and then a cap against Japan. He is the next cab off the rank, but also looks the business from what we've seen of him thus far. Ratema drops to the bench. ALB is still on the bench, and then DMAC, as I mentioned, drops to the bench. Other guys to miss out, Peter Feta and George Bell, who were kind of on the bench last week, drop out of the 23 entirely. Some stats for you. Despite this big French pack, which gets a lot of talk, French are actually similar to the ABs in terms of how they score their tries, largely through the backs. Most sides you will find have a relatively even split between the amount of tries scored through forwards and through backs. The Box, Ireland, they tend to have a relatively even split, but French and the All Blacks have a very lopsided count in favour of the backs. I think the French count this year is like 18-9, with 18 tries through the backs, 9 through the forwards. So it shows you the type of game that the French like to play. They also love the offloads. The French are only second to New Zealand in terms of the amount of offloads they throw a game. They are genuinely a really exciting side, despite the fact they play with a pretty monstrous forward pack. Also, interestingly, there's a flip between the sides in that the French are a slightly less possession-orientated team and slightly more territory, whereas the All Blacks are the flip. The All Blacks tend to edge the possession, but not the territory. So that could make for a really interesting battle if the French are quite happy to play the game in the All Blacks half, but without the ball, and the All Blacks are happy to run it from our own half at times, as long as it doesn't get us into too much trouble. And also France, in terms of their penalties conceded per game, their discipline, they are the best of the Tier 1 sides, just conceding over 8 penalties a game, although they have had a couple of red cards this year, if we look all the way back to the Six Nations, although neither of the red-carded players are in this French 23. So yellow cards and penalties conceded for France has tended to be pretty good. For the All Blacks, there's been a lot of talk about the final quarter during the Rugby Championship, not being able to score points in the final 20 minutes. Well, in the last 2 tests, the final 20 minutes have been all right. They've scored 21 points and conceded none. So that's at least one area that seems to have been rectified by this AB side. And they're great at generating clean breaks, which tends to be a vital element in scoring tries, especially when you like to score tries through your backs, as the All Blacks do. Although it's interesting to see that like the conversion rate between clean breaks and the try count for the ABs isn't that flash. Sometimes they're good at generating the initial break, but then struggling to finish it off. You feel like against France, at the Stade de France, you'll need to finish the majority of your kind of key moments like that. And the discipline's been a bit of a mixed bag. Like the penalty count for the ABs is under 10, which is the number you want to keep it under per game. Last week was a cracker one. They only conceded 5 penalties against the Irish, but then 11 just the week before was a bit of a tough one. It's where England managed to score a lot of their points against the All Blacks. But yellow card count for the All Blacks is pretty high. Had a couple of yellow cards in the last 2 weeks, both for high tackles. You would feel like you also need to keep 15 on the field, especially against a heavier pack, which, as I mentioned, the All Blacks don't usually go into a game the lighter of the 2 packs. Recent history between the sides is 5 of these 5 games is 3-2 to the All Blacks, but the most recent 2 are both French wins. The 3 All Blacks wins came on that 2018 tour of New Zealand from the French side. Remembering the French never send a stronger side out to New Zealand. The 2018 French side was very different from the side that we will see now. Like, even if you look back at the last time the All Blacks got a win in France over France, the only guy who played for France in that game who's still playing now in this squad was Dupont. Like, Pinot was in that team as well, but he's not playing in this game. So Dupont is the only familiar face. Whereas the All Blacks had Bodie at 10, they had D-Mac at 15, Rico at 11, Scotty Barrett, Cody Taylor, and ALB on the bench. So there's a lot of familiar names from 2017 for the All Blacks, but the French squad since that time has had a pretty much complete overhaul under Galtier. So the last 2 games, 40-25 in 2021 and then 27-13 at the World Cup, both pretty comfortable victories for the French. Are the French the favourites for this one? It depends who you ask. The Rugby Forecast algorithm is saying New Zealand are favourites by 5. The bookies are saying France are favourites by 1. It is very rare for those two to have a split, but it does have a split. If you want to get yourself some New Zealand gear, by the way, check out the All Blacks shop down in the description, affiliate of them, which is pleasing. If you want to get yourself some AB's gear, I like a bit of AB's gear. Why not? It's black. Although I don't think the All Blacks are going to be in their home gear this weekend. Check out the store. They're an affiliate of the channel. Do us a favour. Help me out if you want some rugby gear. I like rugby gear. It is on at Stade de France. The kickoff time is 9:10 locally, so that is a pretty good time for those of us here in New Zealand, because that'll make it 9:10 in the morning with the 12-hour difference. So pleasing for both sets of fans. I would imagine the Georgian Nikau Mashukeli is the referee. Fingers crossed we are not talking too much about his performance at the end of the game. If we are, hopefully it's just talking about how he got all the big calls right. But yes, You guys let us know your thoughts. Can you see the All Blacks bucking the recent trend and continuing their great form on their Northern Tour and picking a win over France? Or do you think France at home with that bit of Dupont magic will be too good? You guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Subscribe to the channel. Take care. Bye-bye.